The sound of shattering glass jolted me from my trance-like state. I'd been staring at the computer screen for hours, poring over financial statements and inheritance documents. My eyes darted to the source of the noise, a framed photo of Peter and me on our wedding day, now lying face down on the hardwood floor. "Damn it," I muttered, carefully picking up the frame. As I turned it over, a small piece of paper fluttered out. Curious, I unfolded it, my heart racing as I recognized Peter's messy scrawl. "Alice, don't worry. Once we get our hands on Clara's inheritance, we'll be set for life. Just play nice for now. P." My blood ran cold. I read the note again, hoping I'd misunderstood. But there it was, clear as day. My husband and his mother were plotting to take my inheritance. The front door creaked open, and Peter's voice called out, "Clara, you home?" I quickly shoved the note into my pocket, my mind reeling. "In the study." I managed to reply, my voice surprisingly steady. Peter sauntered in, all easy smiles and charm. "Hey, babe, how's the paperwork coming along?" I forced a smile, my heart pounding. "Fine, just a lot to process." He nodded sympathetically, placing a hand on my shoulder. "I know it's tough dealing with all this after losing your parents, but don't worry, I'm here for you." The words, once comforting, now felt like acid on my skin. I shrugged off his touch, standing abruptly. "I need some air. I'm going for a walk." Peter's brow furrowed. "Everything okay?" "Fine," I lied, grabbing my coat. "I just need to clear my head." As I stepped outside, the crisp autumn air hit my face, bringing a moment of how long had this been going on, how much of our relationship had been a lie. My phone buzzed. A text from Alice. "Sweetie, just checking in. Peter mentioned you're having a hard time with the inheritance paperwork. Why don't you come over for dinner tonight? We can talk it through." I stared at the message, bile rising in my throat. The caring mother-in-law act suddenly seemed so transparent. I typed out a quick reply. "Thanks, but I'm not feeling well. Another time." As I walked, memories flooded back. Peter's insistence on joint accounts, his sudden interest in my parents' business dealings, Alice's probing questions about my family's assets. How had I been so blind? My phone rang. Peter again. I silenced it, quickening my pace. I needed time to think, to plan my next move. Rounding the corner, I nearly collided with Henry, Peter's father. "Clara, I'm so sorry, I didn't see you there." "Henry," I said, forcing a smile. "It's okay. How are you?" He studied my face, concern etched in his kind eyes. "I'm fine, but you look upset. Is everything all right?" For a moment I considered confiding in him, but could I trust anyone in Peter's family? "I'm just dealing with a lot," I said vaguely. Henry nodded, patting my arm. "I understand. Listen, Clara, if you ever need to talk, well, I'm here. And I'm not as oblivious as Alice thinks I am." I blinked, startled by his words. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed again. Another text from Peter. "Where are you? We need to talk about the inheritance. It's important." My stomach churned. I looked up at Henry, making a split-second decision. "Actually, Henry, there is something I need to discuss with you. Can we go somewhere private?" He nodded, gesturing to a nearby cafe. "Lead the way." As we walked, I felt a mix of dread and determination. I didn't know if I could trust Henry, but I knew one thing for certain. My life was about to change dramatically, and I needed allies. Settling into a secluded booth, I took a deep breath. "Henry, there's something you need to know about Peter and Alice." As I sat across from Henry in the dimly lit cafe, the weight of my revelation hung heavy in the air. His face, usually so placid, was a storm of emotions, shock, anger, and a flicker of something that looked like guilt. I had no idea," Henry stammered, his hands trembling around his coffee cup. "Clara, I'm so sorry." I nodded, fighting back tears. "I just can't believe it. All these years." Henry reached across the table, patting my hand. "Tell me everything, from the beginning." I took a deep breath, my mind drifting back to that fateful day 12 years ago. It was my first day of grad school. I was lost, trying to find the economics building. The memory unfolded like a bittersweet movie. Peter, dashing and charming, offering to show me the way. Our shared laughter over terrible campus coffee. Late nights studying, which turned into late nights talking about our dreams. "He was so supportive of my career goals back then," I said, my voice catching. "He'd bring me dinner when I was buried in research, proofread my papers. I thought I'd found my soulmate." Henry nodded, his expression pained. "Peter can be very convincing when he wants something." A flash of anger surged through me. Was that all I was to him? Something he wanted? Before Henry could respond, my phone buzzed again. Another text from Peter. Claire, are you? We need to talk about the inheritance now. I showed Henry the message, my hands shaking. See? It's all he cares about. Henry's face hardened. Clara, there's something you should know about Alice and Peter. They've always been opportunistic, but I never thought they'd go this far. As Henry began to speak, revealing years of manipulation and schemes, I felt my world tilting on its axis. The Peter was thought I knew. The loving husband, the supportive partner, was crumbling away, replaced by a stranger wearing his face. About 5 years into your marriage, Henry said, his voice low, I overheard Alice and Peter talking. They were discussing your career success, your potential inheritance. Alice was pushing Peter to convince you to start a family. The pieces started falling into place. Peter's sudden interest in having children, his disappointment when I wanted to focus on my career. It had all been part of their plan. They thought if you had a baby, you'd be more likely to step back from your career, Henry continued. More reliant on Peter, easier to control. I felt sick. And when that didn't work, Henry sighed heavily. They switched tactics. Peter started encouraging your long hours, your dedication to work, all while he and Alice were what? I pressed, dreading the answer. We're looking for ways to access your accounts, your assets. They've been planning this for years, Clara, waiting for the right moment. The cafe suddenly felt too small, too confining. I stood abruptly, needing to move, to breathe. I have to go. I can't process this right now. Henry stood too, concern etched on his face. Clara, wait, what are you going to do? I paused at the door, my hand on the handle. I don't know, Henry, but I can't go back to that house, not tonight. As I stepped out into the cool evening air, my phone buzzed one last time. A voicemail from Peter. Clara, where the hell are you? We need to discuss the inheritance. Don't do anything stupid. Remember, we're in this together. I laughed bitterly, deleting the message. Together. What a joke. With nowhere else to go, I found myself walking towards my parents' house, my childhood home, now empty and echoing with memories. As I approached the familiar porch, a figure stepped out of the shadows. There you are, Peter said, his voice deceptively calm. We need to talk. My heart pounded as I faced Peter on the porch of my childhood home. His familiar silhouette, once a source of comfort, now filled me with dread. How did you know I'd be here? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Peter stepped closer, his eyes glinting in the dim porch light. I know you. Clara, where else would you go? The irony of his words wasn't lost on me. He thought he knew me. But I was realizing I never truly knew him at all. We need to talk about the inheritance, Peter continued, his tone businesslike. There are some investments we should consider. Stop, I interrupted, holding up a hand. Just stop, Peter. I know about your plan with Alice. I found your note. For a moment, shock flashed across his face before he quickly composed himself. What note? Clara, you're not making sense. You're upset about your parents, I understand, but... Don't, I snapped. Don't you dare use my parents' death as an excuse. How long have you been planning this? How long have you been lying to me? Peter's facade cracked, revealing a glimpse of the manipulator beneath. Clara, be reasonable. We're married. What's yours is mine. I'm just trying to secure our future. Our future? I laughed bitterly. Or your future with my money. Before Peter could respond, headlights swept across the yard. A car pulled up, and to my horror, Alice stepped out. There you are, she called, her voice syrupy sweet. We've been so worried, dear. Why don't we all go inside and talk this through? I felt trapped, cornered by the two people I once thought I could trust most in the world. As if on cue, my phone buzzed, a text from Henry. Are you safe? Do you need help? Drawing strength from the knowledge that at least one person was on my side, I straightened my spine. No, I said firmly. We're not going inside. In fact, I think you both should leave. Alice's smile faltered. Now, Clara, don't be hasty. We're family. We only want what's best for you. What's best for me? I echoed incredulously. Was it best for me when you pushed Peter to pressure me into having children I wasn't ready for? Or when you both started plotting to take my inheritance? Alice's eyes widened, darting to Peter. What have you told her? Nothing, Peter hissed. She's hysterical. She found some note and jumped to conclusions. As they bickered, trying to salvage their scheme, a strange calm settled over me. In that moment, watching them scramble, I saw them for what they truly were, desperate, grasping people who had never truly cared for me at all. "I want a divorce," I said quietly, but with enough force to stop their argument cold. Peter turned to me, his face a mask of disbelief. "Clara, you can't be serious. Think about what you're saying." "I've never been more serious in my life," I replied, my voice steady. "It's over, Peter. You and Alice can leave now, or I'll call the police." Alice stepped forward, her mask of kindness completely gone. "You ungrateful little—" She was cut off by the sound of another car approaching. Henry's sedan pulled up, and he quickly got out, moving to stand beside me. "I think it's time you both left," Henry said firmly, addressing Peter and Alice. Peter looked between us, realization dawning. "Dad, you're taking her side?" Henry's voice was heavy with disappointment. "I'm on the side of what's right, son, something you and your mother seem to have forgotten." As Peter and Alice reluctantly retreated to their car, casting venomous glances back at us, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, but it was quickly replaced by a new, crushing realization. I turned to Henry, tears finally spilling over. My parents, they're really gone, aren't they? And I've been so caught up in all this that I haven't even begun to grieve. Henry placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. "They are, Clara. I'm so sorry, but you're not alone. We'll get through this together." As I stood there, watching Peter and Alice drive away and feeling the solid presence of Henry beside me, I knew my life would never be the same. The road ahead would be difficult, filled with grief and legal battles, but for the first time in days, I felt a glimmer of hope. I would survive this. I would come out stronger. Little did I know, the real fight was only just beginning. The harsh fluorescent lights of my office did little to dispel the darkness that had settled over my life. It had been 3 weeks since the confrontation with Peter and Alice, 3 weeks since I'd started the divorce proceedings, and 3 weeks since I'd buried my parents. The grief and betrayal swirled together, a toxic cocktail that threatened to overwhelm me. I buried myself in work, taking on extra projects and staying late at the office. It was easier to lose myself in spreadsheets and financial reports than to face the empty house that no longer felt like home. "Clara?" My assistant's voice broke through my concentration. "There's someone here to see you. He says it's urgent." I looked up, expecting to see Peter or maybe Henry. Instead, a stern-faced man in a crisp suit stood in my doorway. "Miss Thompson, I'm Richard Hawthorne, your parents' attorney." He extended his hand, which I shook numbly. "We need to discuss your inheritance." My stomach dropped. "Is something wrong?" Richard's expression was grim. "I'm afraid there are some complications. May I sit?" As he settled into the chair across from me, I braced myself for more bad news. I wasn't disappointed. "Your parents' estate is more complex than we initially thought," Richard began. "There are some outstanding debts and legal issues that need to be resolved before the inheritance can be distributed." I felt the blood drain from my face. "What kind of legal issues?" Richard sighed heavily. "It appears your father made some questionable investment decisions in the months before his death. There are allegations of insider trading." The room seemed to spin. My father, the epitome of business ethics, involved in insider trading? It didn't make sense. "That's impossible," I said, my voice shaking. "My father would never—" "I understand this is difficult to hear," Richard interrupted gently, "but the evidence is quite compelling. If these allegations are proven true, it could significantly impact the estate's value." As Richard continued to explain the legal intricacies, my mind raced. Was this why Peter and Alice had been so eager to get their hands on the inheritance? Did they know about these problems? "What does this mean for me?" I asked, interrupting Richard's explanation. He looked at me sympathetically. "It means the inheritance is frozen for now, and there's a possibility that you might be held liable for some of your father's debts." The news hit me like a physical blow. Not only was I losing my parents' legacy, but I might also end up in financial ruin. "What can I do?" I asked, fighting to keep my voice steady. "For now, we need to go through all of your parents' financial records," Richard said. "Every transaction, every investment. We need to build a defense and try to salvage what we can of the estate." I nodded, my mind already shifting into problem-solving mode. "I'll start tonight. I have access to most of their files." As Richard left, promising to be in touch soon, I sat back in my chair, feeling the weight of the world on my shoulders. I had thought the worst was behind me, but it seemed the real battle was just beginning. My phone buzzed. A text from Peter. Heard about your dad's legal troubles. Still want that divorce? Might be smarter to stick together now. Anger surged through me, temporarily displacing the grief and fear. How dare he try to use this situation to manipulate me? With shaking hands, I typed out a reply. The divorce stands. I'd rather face this alone than with a liar by my side. As I hit send, a strange calm settled over me. I realized that despite everything, the loss, the betrayal, the looming financial disaster, I felt stronger than I had in years. I was on my own, yes, but for the first time in a long time, I was fighting for myself. I stood up, gathering my things. It was time to go home, not to the house I'd shared with Peter, but to my parents' home. I had work to do, a legacy to protect, and a future to salvage. As I walked out of the office, I made a silent promise to myself and to my parents. I would get through this. I would uncover the truth. And no matter what it took, I would reclaim my life and my family's honor. The attic of my childhood home was a time capsule filled with dusty memories and forgotten treasures. I'd been avoiding it for weeks, but with Richard's revelation about my father's alleged insider trading, I knew I had to face it. Every document, every scrap of paper could be crucial to unraveling this mess. As I sifted through old photo albums and business files, a wave of nostalgia washed over me. There was Mom in her power suit, Dad beaming proudly at my college graduation. I paused, running my fingers over their smiling faces. How had everything gone so wrong? A small, leather-bound book caught my eye. I recognized it immediately. Mom's journal. With trembling hands, I opened it, and a folded piece of paper fluttered to the floor. As I unfolded it, my heart nearly stopped. It was a letter addressed to me in my mother's elegant handwriting. My dearest Clara, if you're reading this, it means your father and I are gone. There's so much I need to tell you, things we should have shared years ago. Your father's business dealings, they weren't always as clean as we pretended. He got involved with some dangerous people, made some terrible mistakes. We've been trying to fix things to protect you, but if something happens to us before we can make it right, you need to know the truth. There's a safety deposit box at First National Bank, box number 542. The key is taped to the back of your father's desk in the study. Everything you need to know is there. Be careful, sweetheart. Trust no one. We love you more than you could ever know. Mom. My hands shook as I read and reread the letter. My mind raced with questions. What dangerous people? What mistakes? And why hadn't they told me? Just then my phone buzzed. A text from Peter. We need to talk. It's about your parents' business. I know things you need to hear. I stared at the message, torn between curiosity and distrust. Could Peter know something about this mess? Or was this another manipulation? Before I could decide how to respond, I heard a noise downstairs. Footsteps. My heart raced. I was sure I'd locked the door. Clara? Peter's voice called out. I know you're here. We need to talk. Panic surged through me. How had he gotten in? I quickly shoved the letter into my pocket and grabbed a heavy paperweight from a nearby box, ready to defend myself if necessary. As I crept down the attic stairs, I could hear Peter rummaging through the study. My father's study, where the key to the safety deposit box was hidden. Stop right there, I said, my voice steadier than I felt as I entered the room. Peter whirled around, surprise flashing across his face before he composed himself. Clara, thank God, I've been trying to reach you. There's something you need to know about your father's business. How did you get in here? I demanded, gripping the paperweight tighter. Peter held up his hands placatingly. I still have a key, remember? Look, I know you're angry with me, but this is important. Your father, he was involved in some shady deals. I think that's why. Why what? I interrupted, my mind racing. Did Peter know about the insider trading allegations? About the dangerous people my mother mentioned? Peter hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. Why they died, Clara? I don't think your parents' death was an accident. The paperweight slipped from my hand, crashing to the floor. The sound seemed to echo in the suddenly too small room. What are you talking about? I whispered, my voice barely audible. Peter stepped closer, his eyes intense. I've been doing some digging. There are things you don't know, things your parents kept from you. But I can help you, Clara. We can figure this out together. As I stood there, caught between shock, grief, and suspicion, I realized I was at a crossroads. Could I trust Peter, the man who had betrayed me? Or was I truly alone in this fight to uncover the truth and protect my family's legacy? My mother's words echoed in my mind, trust no one. But as I looked at Peter, I knew I had to make a choice. The truth was out there, and I needed to find it, with or without him. Tell me everything, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. But know this, if you're lying to me, if this is some kind of trick, I swear I'll— It's not, Peter interrupted, his face serious. I promise, Clara, no more lies. It's time you knew the truth about your parents. My heart pounded as I stared at Peter, his words about my parents' death echoing in my mind. What do you mean it wasn't an accident? I demanded, my voice trembling. Peter's eyes darted around the room nervously. Clara, your father was in deep with some dangerous people. I've been investigating, and I think— The sudden sound of the front door slamming cut him off. Clara? Peter? Alice's shrill voice rang out. Peter's face paled. Shit, he muttered. She wasn't supposed to be here. As Alice's footsteps approached, I made a split-second decision. Hide, I hissed at Peter, shoving him towards the closet. I need to hear what she has to say without you interfering. Just as Peter disappeared into the closet, Alice burst into the study, her face a mask of false concern. Clara, darling, I've been so worried. I came as soon as I heard about the inheritance troubles. I steeled myself, forcing a neutral expression. How thoughtful, Alice. How exactly did you hear about that? Alice faltered for a moment before regaining her composure. Oh, you know how news travels. Now, let's discuss how we can help you through this difficult time. As Alice prattled on about financial advisors and legal teams, my mind raced. How much did she know? Was she involved in whatever Peter was hinting at? Alice, I interrupted, what do you know about my father's business dealings? Her eyes narrowed slightly. Why, nothing more than what any of us knew. Paul was a successful businessman, but the details, well, that was his domain. I took a deep breath, deciding to take a risk. And what about the insider trading allegations? Alice's reaction was immediate and telling. Her face drained of color, and her hand flew to her throat. I don't know what you're talking about, she stammered. I think you do, I pressed, taking a step closer. I think you know a lot more than you're letting on. About the insider trading, about the dangerous people my father was involved with, maybe even about my parents' death. Alice's facade crumbled. You don't understand, she hissed, her kindly demeanor evaporating. Your father was going to ruin everything. We had to protect our interests. My blood ran cold. We? Who's we, Alice? Before she could answer, the closet door burst open, and Peter stumbled out. Mom, stop, he shouted. This isn't what we agreed on. Alice whirled on him, her face contorted with rage. You fool! What are you doing here? As they argued, pieces started falling into place. The inheritance scheme, the sudden interest in my parents' business, the convenient timing of their deaths. It was all connected. You were involved, I whispered. The realization hitting me like a physical blow. Both of you. In my parents' death. Peter turned to me, his eyes pleading. Clara, it's not what you think. We never meant for anyone to get hurt. It was just supposed to be a simple fraud scheme. But your father found out and what? I screamed, fury and grief overwhelming me. You had him killed? My mother, too? Alice lunged forward, grabbing my arm. Now, Clara, let's not be hasty. We can work this out. The inheritance, the business. We can split it. No one else needs to know about this unfortunate situation. I jerked away from her, disgust and rage boiling inside me. You're insane, both of you. I'm calling the police. As I reached for my phone, Peter made a desperate grab for it. In the scuffle, I lost my balance, crashing into the desk. Pain exploded in my head as it struck the corner, and the world began to spin. The last thing I saw before darkness claimed me was Alice standing over me, a look of cold calculation in her eyes. I'm sorry, Clara, she said, her voice distant, but we can't let you ruin everything now. As consciousness slipped away, one thought burned in my mind. I had to survive this. For my parents, for justice, and for the truth that still lay hidden in that safety deposit box. The fight wasn't over yet. I awoke to the harsh glare of fluorescent lights and the steady beep of a heart monitor. As my vision cleared, I saw Henry sitting by my bedside, his face etched with concern. Clara, he said softly, leaning forward. Thank God you're awake. Do you remember what happened? The memories came flooding back. Peter's revelation, Alice's arrival, the confrontation. I tried to sit up, wincing at the pain in my head. Where are they? I demanded. Henry's expression darkened. Peter and Alice are in custody. I arrived just after you lost consciousness and called the police. Clara, I had no idea how far they'd gone. I'm so sorry. As Henry filled me in on the details, my mind raced. Peter and Alice were facing charges, but without concrete evidence, it might not be enough to convict them for my parents' deaths. The safety deposit box, I blurted out, struggling to get out of bed. We need to get to the bank. Henry gently pushed me back. Whoa, slow down. What safety deposit box? I quickly explained about my mother's letter and the hidden key. Henry's eyes widened. That could be the evidence we need. But Clara, you're in no condition to— I have to go. I insisted, already pulling out my IV. This might be our only chance to prove what they did. Despite the doctor's protests, I checked myself out of the hospital. Every moment felt crucial, like we were racing against an invisible clock. As we drove to the bank, Henry filled me in on the divorce proceedings. Alice has been trying to manipulate the courts, claiming you're mentally unstable. She's pushing for Peter to get half of everything, including your inheritance. I gripped the armrest, my knuckles white. Over my dead body, I muttered. At the bank we encountered our first obstacle. I'm sorry, Mrs. Thompson, the manager said, but we have strict protocols. Without the proper documentation, I can't allow access to the safety deposit box, even if you have the key. I felt panic rising in my chest. You don't understand. This is about my parents' murder. Please, I'm begging you. The manager hesitated, then nodded. I'll make an exception, but I'll need to be present when you open it. With trembling hands, I inserted the key. Inside the box was a USB drive and a thick folder of documents. As I flipped through the pages, my heart raced. Bank statements, emails, threatening letters, it was all here. Proof of my father's involvement in insider trading and, more importantly, evidence of blackmail from the dangerous people he'd gotten involved with. This is it, I breathed, turning to Henry. This proves everything. Just then, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. I answered hesitantly. Clara Thompson? A gruff voice asked. This is Detective Reeves. I'm calling about your parents' case. We've received some new information that suggests their deaths weren't accidental. My heart leapt. I know, I said. I have evidence. Lots of it. That's good, the detective replied, his tone grave. Because we've just received a threat against your life. Whoever was behind your parents' deaths knows you're on to them. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. I gripped the phone tighter, my voice barely a whisper. What do I do? Stay where you are, Detective Reeves instructed. We're sending officers to your location now. Don't trust anyone. As I hung up, I turned to Henry, my mind reeling. Could I trust him? Was anyone truly on my side? Clara? Henry asked, concern etched on his face. What's wrong? I clutched the folder to my chest, my heart pounding. The evidence in my hands could bring justice for my parents, but it could also get me killed. As sirens wailed in the distance, I realized I was standing on the precipice of a decision that could change everything. Henry, I said, my voice shaking, I need you to listen carefully. What I'm about to tell you could put us both in danger. Are you ready for that? Henry's eyes met mine, determination replacing concern. I'm with you, Clara, whatever it takes. As the sirens grew louder, I took a deep breath. It was time to face the truth, no matter the cost. The final battle was about to begin. The courtroom fell silent as I took the stand, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure everyone could hear it. Peter and Alice sat at the defense table, their faces a mix of anger and fear. Henry gave me an encouraging nod from the gallery. Miss Thompson, the prosecutor began, please tell the court what you discovered in your parents' safety deposit box. Taking a deep breath, I recounted everything, the insider trading, the blackmail, the threats. With each word, I could see Peter and Alice growing more agitated. And in your opinion, the prosecutor continued, what led to your parents' deaths? I looked directly at Peter and Alice as I answered. They were murdered because they were going to expose the corruption, and the people responsible are sitting right there. Chaos erupted in the courtroom. Alice leapt to her feet, screaming accusations, while Peter seemed to crumple in on himself. As the judge called for order, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The truth was finally out. The trial lasted for weeks, each day bringing new revelations and shocking twists. But in the end, justice prevailed. Peter and Alice were found guilty on all counts, including conspiracy to commit murder. As I watched them being led away in handcuffs, I felt no joy, only a profound sense of relief and sadness. It was over, but at what cost? In the months that followed, I threw myself into rebuilding my life. I moved back into my childhood home, finding comfort in the memories it held. Slowly, I began to heal. One crisp autumn day, as I was sorting through old photo albums in the attic, I came across a picture of my parents holding me as a baby. Their faces were radiant with love and hope for the future. Tears streamed down my face as I clutched the photo to my chest. In that moment, I realized something profound. Despite everything I'd been through, I still wanted that. A family, a future filled with love and hope. 4 years later, I stood in that same attic, my hand resting on my swollen belly. The room was half-packed, filled with boxes labeled nursery and baby clothes. "Clara," my husband's voice called from downstairs. "The movers are here. Are you ready?" I smiled, taking one last look around the room that held so many memories, both painful and precious. "Coming," I called back. As I made my way downstairs, I paused in front of the mirror in the hallway. The woman staring back at me was different from the one who had first uncovered Peter's betrayal all those years ago. Stronger, wiser, and finally, truly happy. My husband David met me at the bottom of the stairs, his face lighting up as he saw me. "There's my girls," he said softly, placing a gentle hand on my belly. I leaned into his embrace, feeling our baby kick between us. "We're ready," I whispered. As we walked out of my childhood home for the last time, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The house had served its purpose. It had been a sanctuary, a place of healing. But now it was time for a new chapter. We drove to our new home, a charming house with a big yard and plenty of room for our growing family. As David helped me out of the car, I caught sight of Henry walking up the driveway, a housewarming gift in his hands. "Welcome home," he said, pulling me into a warm hug. Looking at the two men who had stood by me through everything, my supportive husband and the father-in-law who had become more like a father, I felt overwhelmed with gratitude. That night, as David and I sat on our new porch swing, watching the sunset, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. The pain, the betrayal, the fight for justice, it had all led to this moment. "What are you thinking about?" David asked, squeezing my hand. I smiled, placing our intertwined hands on my belly. "The future," I replied, "and how sometimes you have to go through the darkest times to find your way to the light." As the first stars appeared in the twilight sky, I felt our baby kick again. A reminder that life goes on, that there's always hope for new beginnings. I had survived, I had thrived, and now surrounded by love and on the cusp of motherhood, I was ready to embrace whatever the future held. The end was really just the beginning.